Hello everyone, Ailuromage the Magic History Cat here. I finally got around to leveling the jobs I discussed in previous videos, the Paladin, White Mage, Astrologian, and Sage, where I talked about where the terms and names of their abilities come from and the meaning behind them. If you haven't seen the previous videos, I covered the religious themes of the Paladin and White Mage abilities, the astrology terms used for the Astrologian, and the historical Greek humoral theory behind the names of the Sage abilities. So now that I finally have all four of these classes to level 100, let's go ahead and go over what's new in Dawntrail. Starting in order with the Paladin, which has many Christian-themed ability names, let's start with the update to Atonement. Previously, when you gained the Atonement Ready effect, you could use Atonement 3 times, and the update has now changed the second and third use of this into Supplication and Sepulcher. So a Supplication is a specific kind of prayer that is better described as a plea. It's a form of pleading to God and inherently deeply emotional. The Catechism of the Catholic Church describes it as a struggle in prayer or a prayer of petition. So asking God for deliverance or help in a desperate time of need is a supplication. A sepulcher, in a general sense, is a place for burial, usually very ceremonial and considered to be sacred. In Christianity, when one refers to the Holy Sepulcher, they are referring to the location where Jesus was buried, in which biblically he lay dead for 3 days before being resurrected by the Holy Spirit. So now let's look at the new abilities Paladin has received. They are Guardian, Imperator, and Blade of Honor. Now surprisingly, these abilities are not really religiously tied like many other abilities in the Paladin's moveset. They somewhat go back into that blend of knight and gladiator themes that do exist within the class, as the Paladin is a mixed bag of these things into a fantasy class. So moving on with Guardian, Guardian is the upgrade to Sentinel, increasing to a 40% damage reduction from 30% along with a barrier. So very straightforward. Next is Imperator, which is the upgrade to Requiescat. So just like Requiescat, it is a strong damaging attack that also hits nearby enemies and activates the Confiteor chain. So as I mentioned in the previous video, a Requiescat is a prayer over the peace of the dead, as it essentially translates to may he, she rest. Imperator, from the Latin impero, this is where we get the word emperor, means command, and Imperator was a title that was initially used for commanders and then later saw more prominent use as the title for the Roman emperor. So very gladiator themed with this one, which ties to those original Paladin roots before you get your Jobstone. And then lastly we have Blade of Honor, which is another extension onto the entire Confiteor chain that lets you execute a series of combo attacks. And in the previous video I talked about how Confiteor is a specific Catholic prayer of confession, and Confiteor is Latin for I confess. In any case, the chain is a series of moves like Blade of Faith and Truth and so on, and these are all terms loosely based around things mentioned biblically for living a proper godly life, but they are also terms very frequently found in various knight codes of honor or traits that a knight should possess, mentioned in all manner of historical texts. So again, the new abilities introduced and the upgrades to existing ones are altogether a blend of these religious, gladiator, and knight themes all together that have become commonplace in the Paladin class. Now we move over to the White Mage. White Mage received various balancing changes, but as for what is new for the White Mage, they have been granted a dash called Ethereal Shift. This has much more to do with the game universe itself, somewhat going back to the Conjurer roots of the White Mage, where it was much more focused around ether and nature, which I think is really cool, and I'm sure every White Mage main is happy to have this extra movement option. As for their post-level 90 abilities, surprisingly, really not much. Glare and Medica have received another upgrade, and the only really new thing is Divine Caress, which is another very wordy ability, but it essentially grants everyone barriers and healing over time, and can only be activated after using Temperance. So a Divine Caress is essentially being touched by God, and this is something biblically mentioned. Laying one's hands on another is something Jesus did many times throughout the Bible, and most Christians are Trinitarians who believe that Jesus is God. So when Jesus healed in this way, it was a divine caress by God. Being touched by God is a very high blessing and is sometimes attributed to the moment a believer has been saved, which connects with the icon itself. If we take a close look, we can see a figure with white feathers and a rainbow. All of these symbols you will see throughout Christianity, and having them together in this way resembles a lot of Christian art when depicting the baptism of Christ. Much art will show Jesus in a pool of water with a dove. Biblically, rainbows are a symbol of God's grace, mercy, and his covenant, a promise to humanity given to Noah after the Great Flood, where God claims he will never again destroy the world with this method. The white feathers in the icon resemble that of a white dove, which appear in almost every depiction of the baptism of Jesus because, biblically, the Holy Spirit took the form of a dove and flew above the waters at his baptism. Additionally, divine caress can only be used after using temperance, and biblically, temperance is referred to as one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit. So overall, the White Mage seem to get two abilities that both tie in with their original conjurer roots and their religious theme that they have grown into over the last few expansions. Next, we move on to the Astrologian, and once again, this job has been very heavily adjusted. It's almost a meme at this point. Rest in peace, Astrologian. In any case, the draw mechanic has been entirely changed, and we are now left with Astral Draw and Umbral Draw. Now, interestingly enough, these two have less to do with astrology and more to do with the in-game universe. So there are astral and umbral polarities in the game's world that dictate the behavior of the 6 elements. The 6 elements being wind, fire, lightning, ice, earth, and water. Astral is an active polarity, and umbral is a passive polarity. So for example, wind in astral alignment could result in a powerful tornado, but in an umbral alignment could result in a gentle breeze. But the elements favor or gravitate towards one polarity over the other. Astral primarily has wind, fire, and lightning, and umbral primarily has ice, earth, and water. If we look at the cards that are drawn, Astral Draw can either draw the Balance, the Arrow, or the Spire. These 3 cards represent the heavens of fire, wind, and lightning in-game, and Umbral Draw draws the Spear, the Bull, or the Ewer, which represent the heavens of ice, earth, and water. As for the cards themselves, I personally think it's great they have been given 6 different unique effects, as they used to have 6 unique effects when the class was first introduced in Heavensward. I never really liked the change they did where all 6 just gave damage, but in any case, let's move on to their new post-level 90 abilities. Starting with Oracle, a new AoE damaging GCD that's used after activating Divination. For the most part, this is just a nice little connection for these, as divination is what astrology is all about. Reading charts and using the tarot are forms of divination, and an oracle is the one who does the divination. And this is reflected beautifully as the ability showcases the 12 in-game star signs, so it's altogether a nicely unified combo action. Next is Helios Conjunction, which is the upgrade from Aspected Helios. So a conjunction in astrology is when 2 planets are very close together or aligned, and this almost always results with them being within the same house or the same sign, essentially, just because of their positions. This can have any number of effects, and it all depends on which planets are involved or what sign they happen to be in. So for a Helios conjunction, well, Helios is referring to the sun. So if a planet is in conjunction with the sun, this can produce a number of different results in astrology. Firstly, it's generally not a good thing if a planet gets too close to the sun, because then a planet becomes combust, meaning it is being burned by the sun's rays and loses some of its influence. And yes, that's what the ability combust is referring to. Now, in rare cases, a planet can enter what is called Kazumi, and this happens when the planet is perfectly aligned with the sun in a very specific angle, and when this happens, it is the direct opposite of combust. The planet it becomes highly empowered and gains immense energy. So I assume this is what this ability is referring to because it's the Astrologian's best AoE healing ability. Additionally, if you look closely at the ability, there are a total of 12 sun symbols that appear throughout the animation to reflect the 12 signs, maintaining that theme. And lastly is Sun Sign, which is a party-wide damage reduction ability that can only be used when Neutral Sect is activated, which essentially is a big healing buff to the Astrologian's heals. So a Sun Sign in astrology is your star sign. There are 12 signs and by extension 12 houses that the celestial bodies can be in at any given time. So I suppose if you don't like your star sign, you can just blame the sun for being where it was when you were born. So overall, the Astrologian maintains its astrology themes quite well with these new additions and roots itself some more within the game's universe with its new draw abilities. And lastly, we have the Sage, my personal favorite healing class. So aside from its balance changes, first let's point out the AoE damage over time ability the Sage now receives at level 82, Eucrasian Dyscrasia. This is a bit of a jumble of a phrase. I go over these terms in much more detail in my video on the Sage, but essentially Eucrasia means good mixture, and this is why it's associated with healing spells the Sage has, and Dyscrasia means bad mixture, and that's why it deals harm. The balance of the fluids in your body versus the imbalance has everything to do with what humoral theory is talking about, as this is what determines your health. So putting these two together into one ability is like saying good-bad mixture. It really doesn't make sense in a literal way, but it makes sense mechanically because Eucrasia is what the augmenting ability is called that gets applied to Dyscrasia in order to use this ability. But overall, this is a little strange as a phrase. So let's move on to the post level 90 abilities. I'll just go ahead and mention the upgrade to Eucrasian Prognosis. Nothing has really changed here, it's just a better version of that ability. So then we move on to Psyche, which is an AoE damaging GCD. Psyche in Greek relates to one's soul or spirit. Your Psyche is you, and it's also one of the Greek goddesses, which represents the soul. Now, how this is viewed varies. In a philosophical sense, your Psyche is more so viewed as your existence or who you are. And to pull up that old cliche, I think, therefore I am, this is more in line what this means in this context. But it was also used biblically in the original Greek Bible to refer to one's immortal and eternal soul. More so used in the New Testament, but it's used to refer to your soul or your spirit, and this goes hand in hand with the breath, pneuma, which of course is another Sage ability. So both in Christianity and Greek cosmology, Psyche is soul or life. Biblically, God's breath, pneuma, gave life and soul to Adam, Psyche. And in Greek cosmology, air, pneuma, is the element by which all things came to be, including life. And this is what made you, the breath of the universe. And lastly, we have Philosophia, which is a huge healing buff, granting party members the effect of eudaimonia, in which they restore health upon landing spells. So Philosophia is obviously where we get the word philosophy, but the actual meaning of this word is quite beautiful. It's a combination of two words, philo, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. So philosophy is love of wisdom. So if you study philosophy, then you are a lover of wisdom. And the effect that this ability grants is called eudaimonia. Eu means good, and a daimona is a spirit. So a eudaimona is a good spirit, meaning you're under the effect of a good spirit. Now, because this is granted during the use of Philosophia, this is definitely tied to the philosophical usage of this term. In this context, eudaimonia persona is the concept of a meaningful and purposeful existence, being a person of good moral character, ethical and wise. It's achieving the ultimate human form. So Sage overall gives us more with its philosophical ties to the ancient Greek wisdom. That was the long-awaited update to the terms and names of the class abilities of the Paladin, White Mage, Astrologian, and Sage. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like and telling me what you thought in the comments. And please feel free to add more. I love reading whatever knowledge others have to share. And be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss the next one. If you haven't seen the previous videos already, I will link them in the description. Thank you, and remember to pet a cat today.